Welcome to Law Firms on the Map, the go-to digital marketing show for attorneys serious about their business growth. I'm your host, Christoph Sprankens, CEO of On the Map Marketing. Our agency has helped thousands of attorneys crush their SEO and digital marketing goals. Today, I'm meeting with law firm operation mastermind Chad Celi, aka Chad GPT. Chad has spearheaded multitude of legal intake system setups and created massive review generation processes. So I'm really excited to have him on. We always talk about legal marketing, but this is step after the legal marketing to optimize the results we're generating. So Chad, pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure. Happy to be here and happy to help any of your listeners or law firms.
Of course, that's the goal here. Takeaways, insights, strategies, etc. So before we jump into more specific action items and things you've done in the past, maybe just a quick left turn. Tell us how you got into legal industry and what has been a bit of your experience in the last 4 or 5 years within.
Well, I founded my own marketing firm in 2009, and I've worked in over 119 different industries. So probably unpopular business model, but I think my first law firm that I worked with was actually Daryl Isaacs, the Hammer. So I had a wonderful experience with him, and since have worked with many of the other top law firms or PI law firms around the country. And I just tried to bring a lot of my sales and marketing experience from other industries into the personal injury space, primarily using words, leveraging words, the words that you use and the words that you lose, whether it's how you handle intake calls or how you generate reviews or get more conversions. So once you get on the map, you want to try to leverage those into signups as much as possible, right?
Of course. Daryl Isaacs, such a big name in personal injury space. So how did your paths cross with him, and what was the project you got started in the legal space with him?
I would say it was by accident that I started working with his intake department because he had hired me as a marketing consultant. But I realized that there was a little bit of a disconnect between the marketing efforts and how the phones were being answered. And I mean, a lot of the great big firms I've worked with, I think they all do very well. But when you're in an industry like personal injury, where there's a very, very high cost per lead and there's a high value case potentially. So it's a high stakes environment where you don't want to leave things to chance. I personally love chicken wings, but I don't love winging it when it comes to this inbound sales environment. So I looked into some recorded calls and I saw an opportunity, and that, started working a lot more with the intake department. And I think one thing that I want to stress though is sometimes the principal of the firm may not always realize what's happening on intake calls. Without someone actually listening to the calls, they may believe something is happening a certain way, or they've set up a system or script, or they think their intake reps are wonderful and doing a great job. But without the oversight and surveillance of actually listening to calls, sometimes there's room for improvement. So over the years, I've listened to over 1,000 recorded calls. So a lot of fun stories there too. But, I think that's a really important aspect.
Okay, so let's take a quick step back. I think you touched on a really good point. Intake often is underlooked as part of marketing and that transitory step between a lead and a signed case. And, we come across that with our clients too quite often, actually, where it's just like, well, you got me a lead, but I didn't a case. But then you start looking at the calls and submitted the forms and what were the response times? What was the conversations? Maybe, intake rep was just trying to clock out at 5 and they got a call at 4:57 and they're just trying to brush the person off the phone so they can go home. And, that's a scary situation to be faced with. So intake is really almost like a sales team. That's a good analogy. I I've heard recently, and then we've been kind of sharing that with our clients and examining as a concept. You come from a place saying, hey, I come in as a consultant and I look at your current team and I say, hey, how strong is this process? How well are they handling the intake calls? Let's just take it from ground zero. So, what should be some of these fundamentals that an intake team should apply or even be held accountable to and trained to? And what that SOP, standard operating procedure, what that looks like for you?
Yeah, I absolutely do that. But you touched on something that is super important that I want to make sure we don't miss, which is you had pointed out that oftentimes intake can be undervalued. But I'd like to share with you before we get into the nitty gritty of the reasons why intake is typically undervalued and why many personal injury law firms are overconfident about their intake, right? So there's a few key reasons here. Number one, when you're a smaller firm, there's a lot more attorneys that are actually taking the intake calls. Okay. And then when they finally, the way they handle the calls and the amount of confidence they have on a call typically generates a very strong conversion rate. So what happens is they pass it off to typically an entry level position. And I'm not trying to diminish it in any way. Actually, I feel like critical, but they pass it off to someone that they hire, not realizing that they don't have sales training, that they don't know how difficult it is, and they may not have the same level of confidence that an attorney has. So that's one critical reason, in addition to what we already pointed out, that they oftentimes don't listen to recorded calls, so they really don't know what's happening. And the final thing is, again, just the appreciation of there's such a high cost for leads. This is a hyper competitive environment. So you need to bring your A game. And I like to share with people these stats that, it's not scientific, but from what I've seen over the years across the country, there's about 80% of prospects that will call that are basically a laydown. And what I mean by that is 80% of the people that will call your personal injury law firm, if you tell them that they have a case and that you can help them, they will move forward. Now, because of that, people get very confident because they feel like, oh my gosh, it's so easy. I mean, most of the people that I talk to just move forward, right? But that's mediocre. If you want to go from good to great, you have to think about that other 20%. These are the people that could go either way. They could be on the fence. They could be shopping from the get-go. So you really need to think of it as an inbound sales department where every call matters. It could be a $100,000 conversation and you can't treat it lightly. I've worked with firms, and I won't mention names on this part, but I've worked with firms that have 5, 7 individuals. And for some of them, it would be worthwhile to pay a couple of the reps to stay home and not answer phones because so many cases are lost, right? Think about that.
And that's an impressive number of incoming calls too. Uh, and obviously, there's only probably small percentage of firms that are experiencing that. For firms in that transitory state from attorney-led intake to hiring their first intake person, what do you think is the size when that's the right time to do that?
I don't know if I'd be the best person to ask because there's so many variables, but typically I would recommend it early, but it just needs to have a lot more onboarding and training than they're used to having. Because again, you have to think of a new employee not having the confidence and the experience as an attorney. You want them to be very confident. They need to understand that this hiring in this position is a confidence game.
Mm-hmm.
And although empathy is important, they need to sound confident. If you don't sound confident on the phone, your conversions will suffer. So I generally recommend that people get aggressive with their hiring because their time as an attorney is valuable and you want to be able to scale. So I lean towards, more aggressive hiring there. But that's less of an issue. More of it is preparing the intake person and treating it as almost the bottleneck of the organization, because all those Facebook likes and impressions and being on the map, it's like they all have to get funneled through someone answering the phone if you want to turn it into a signed up case. So you just want to treat it with, give it some white glove treatment, I guess.
So let's go back to the SOP idea. From your experience, and you've worked with multitude of some of the biggest PI firms in the nation, what is that standard operating procedure that intake manager is held accountable to? What is the structure? Is there like a lead intake person, then they oversee others? Like it's an exciting thing having so many leads, but then you have to convert them. So be interesting to hear your take on what are the best practices to build these intake teams.
Well, we already pointed out one that you want to hire based on confidence, and ideally hire people with previous sales experience. Oftentimes, you don't need to be concerned about people having past legal experience. When I listen to recorded calls, it's once in a blue moon do prospects ask questions that are legally based or legalese questions, so it's pretty much a gut feeling that they're going off of. So, as far as the structure, in the beginning, when you just have one or two reps, ideally, and it's most likely going to be an attorney who's overseeing them. But as you get to 3, 4 reps, you want to have a manager who's not only helping with the training, but again, you have to track the numbers of what are the leads, how much money are we spending on marketing? What are the leads that are coming in? What are the types of leads that are coming in? And then you really want to follow these two numbers. You want to follow the total number of calls that an intake rep will take and their total number of cases, right? That's one number. That's kind of giving you a high level. And then the other is you want to drill down into how many wanted cases that you've taken the call on and how many signups. So there are two different numbers, but you want to look at both of those because you can notice a wide difference between different reps. And that's really where you get to a high level performance team is you want everyone to be kind of at that rock star level where they're converting at a high conversion rate. And you may have someone who's super sweet or who's an awesome employee, but they're just in the wrong seat. They're not meant for that inbound sales type of atmosphere. So it's good to identify that early and move them around the company.
So first we look at the incoming calls and forms, and then we look at the cases. So that's sort of like the overall closing ratio. But what were those mid layers you mentioned? You said overall interested leads, and then those are the ones in the funnel, or what? Can you expand on that one more time?
When you're trying to evaluate the performance of an intake rep, the two main numbers I would look at would be knowing the total number of calls that they've taken, right? Okay, this person, they had 100 different phone calls that they answered where they were new leads.
I love that
Doesn't matter
phone.
what kind, great at it. Yeah, we got a prop phone. So you want the total number of calls that they're taking, okay? And then you actually get the total number of cases that they signed up, right? This gives you, it's kind of like an overall benchmark of their conversion in comparison to other reps. But beyond that, you need to drill down one layer deeper, which is out of the total number of calls that they've received or they've taken of new leads, you want to know out of all those calls, how many actually had cases that you wanted, right? Now, there is a human component there of someone identifying what's a case that you want, but it really drills down to, injury cases or, something that you would want to take. And from those, best case scenario, you're converting at 90 to 95%. And what I'll notice is when firms actually look at their conversion rate, sometimes it could be as low as 75% or 80% of the cases that they wanted. Now, sometimes it's how they handled the call, and sometimes it can be related to how they're following up, which is another topic.
Well, great. So, we get the baseline numbers in place. There's a team. Now we bring you on. What happens? How do you get those numbers improved? Because obviously you would say, hey, well, starting now, average rep gets, I don't know, let's say, what is it, 40, 50 calls a month, more?
Yeah, that's just really going to depend on the firm. But Yeah. So let's dive into a few tactical scenarios, words to use and words to lose when you're on the phone. Because when I do my training, the more tactical, the better. Because if you stay too high level and strategic and in the clouds of control the call and be confident, most people don't know what to do with that information. So I try to get very specific on how they can basically sound more confident on the phone and move them through the call. And some of them are going to seem fairly simple or nuanced, but I'll give you a few quick examples. So things like avoiding the words, I don't know, right? That doesn't build confidence if you say, I don't know, right? Even if you're a new rep answering the phone, you can replace the phrase, I don't know, with, that's a great question. So you start with, that's a great question. There's a lot of variables. So, oh, how long is my case going to take? Or how much is my case worth? That's a great question. There's many variables, and I want to make sure you get the most accurate information. And we're going to be looking at that as we approach, look at your treatment. So these are the little nuances in how you answer questions and how you talk to prospects. And either they're going to feel more confident or less confident. So if someone calls and they say, another example, someone calls and they say, yeah, I wasn't in an accident, but I slipped while I was at Target. Do you guys handle those types of cases? Right? Now, if I'm on the phone, if I say, hey, John, do we handle flip and fall cases here?
So,
Right? And I know you think it's funny, but obviously that wouldn't build confidence versus if you say, yes, we absolutely handle those types of cases. In fact, we handle a lot of slip and fall cases here. Right? So little nuances like that. Even another version is, instead of saying contract is a word that can be very stressful. It has negative references. Oh my gosh, I got to sign a contract. That's going to take an hour. That's going to be miserable, right? So you can change that to agreement, or my preference would be paperwork. We're going to authorize paperwork versus sign the contract, right? Do you get the idea of those words?
so you have a whole vocabulary that you coach the intake teams to adjust. Okay. And how long usually takes you to fully implement that?
For many firms that are engaged where they already have an intake manager and there's a little bit of a culture there, I would say a quarter or two, because I usually do the trainings in quarters. The more engaged they are, the better, because some people are taking a bunch of notes and they're testing things that same day. Others, take a while to come around. But think of, I never have a firm that will have 100% implementation of anything. That's unrealistic. And anyone who's done any training knows that, right? But it doesn't matter. Here's the difference. The phone that's ringing, again, could be $100,000 case, or it could have cost you $500 or $1,000 to get that phone to ring. So every little percentage difference or improvement you can make, it's the gift that keeps on giving. These these reps, like you mentioned, they're taking dozens of calls every day or every week, every month. So you want them to train these new behaviors where they get stronger and stronger as your law firm scales.
Converting just one more case a month, it makes a huge difference. It's not e-commerce. I mean, it's CRO and e-commerce, but
I'm telling you, Chris, you'd be, and you probably wouldn't be surprised, but listening to all these calls, I'm telling you, people are craving confidence. They don't want to call 10 law firms, right? They can because it pick up a mobile phone, but they want to feel as though they called the right person that can help them, right? And I'll give you another few quick examples. Another thing that happens in the very beginning of the call that's a missed opportunity is you got to be thinking when a prospect is calling, in their brain, they're asking themselves, am I talking to the right person? Am I talking to the right person that can help me with my type of case? Okay. Now, if you answer the phone and you start going into intake mode, okay, tell me about what happened. Okay, do you have your police report? Give me your email address, your phone number. You ask them 20 different questions. It doesn't really build a lot of confidence. So very early on the call, you can tell them when they introduce themselves, you can literally say, yes, you've reached the right person. I can help you. right? Versus them thinking they're going to be transferred to someone or they don't know who they're talking to. Again, these are all little nuances, but can all make a big difference because if you can master the welcome and handle the call very well, then you don't need to feel like a salesperson convincing them to authorize the paperwork. Then they're already confident and ready to move forward. Where a lot of people go wrong is they pop the question, meaning they're asking to sign the contract too early. And then that's where backtracking, they try to get them to sign the contract before someone's ready. And then the client says, well, let me show it to my wife. Oh, let me look it over tonight. So there's a lot that can be impacted on the actual call.
I feel like we're touching just surface on this, but the next part I want to talk about, which is equally exciting and I guess in a way, for me, even more exciting. I mean, I want my clients to make money and improve their conversion rates on intake, but the review generation, that helps our efforts a lot, which is map rankings and LSA placements. So having high amount of engaged real reviews is a ranking factor and obviously a great branding factor too. And you are known for creating review generation systems for law firms. So I wanted to learn about those. The couple of nuggets you already gave on intake sets the precedent that there's some interesting things you've done on that end too. So
Yeah, let's dive in. And I would say, the similarity between review generation and mastering intake is it's all about leverage. If you're listening to this podcast and you don't have a budget like Mike Morse or Daryl Isaacs, and you don't have unlimited money, you want to think about how do I get more out of what I'm already doing, right? More leverage, right? You want more conversion. So when they do call you or when you do have a client, you want more referrals, you want more reviews. So it's all about using words to get more leverage. So another reason why review generation is typically underappreciated is you really don't have a lot of, advertising representatives that are promoting this because there's not really money involved. It needs to be something as a culture, you understand the value of these reviews because you understand how people shop. You know, Even people listening, if you're an attorney, you've been to Amazon and you looked at reviews before you bought a product, or you went out to eat dinner. And if it's at a 2.5 stars, you're probably not going to eat there for dinner. It's no different where people are making, in this Lance generation, split second decisions based on your review profile. So from a foundation, you want to think about these top two things: your review rating and your number of reviews. Okay. Yes, it's helpful if people use certain words for the algorithm and say wonderful things about you in a long paragraph. But realistically, where you're going to have the most impact is making sure your review rating is, high, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9 maybe. And you want to have essentially more reviews than competitors. Okay. Another number I want to share with your listeners that I think is valuable to know, because I've worked with many different law firms across the country. So you should write this down. You should be able to secure reviews from 50 to 80% of all of your clients. Okay. So now, if you're taking on, 10 cases a week, or 100 cases a month, that at least 50% of those, 50 of those people should be giving you a review. If they're not, there's a couple things happening. One, your service probably really sucks, right? To a degree. Or two, more than likely, you're not asking enough or in the right way. And I'm thinking that's people, right? Does that sound fair?
absolutely, yeah. Or you just don't have a process in general in place to secure the reviews.
Yeah, it's a little too, maybe even similar to the intake approach. It's too nonchalant. You need a little bit more of a focus on how are we going to successfully and systematically acquire more reviews so we can keep our, cost per acquisition down. And again, this is another gift that keeps on giving. Once you get these reviews on there and they post, they stay on there virtually forever, right? As long as they're legitimate. So let's go into just a few ways that you can increase reviews. But I want you, when you're listening to this, know that you've got to give it some time, energy, and focus because of how valuable they are, right? If you just, make an announcement to the company, having a company meeting. All right, guys, we really need to get those reviews up. Make sure to ask, some people. That won't work. Uh, when everyone's responsible, no one's responsible, if you've ever heard that expression. So it's best if you can have the person with a primary relationship is the one who should be asking for the review. So typically in a PI law firm, that's the case manager or paralegal that's spending the most time with the prospect, right? Now, why is it important that the primary relationship is asking? Because that's the main reason why the client is actually going to do it. They don't care about your law firm. They don't care about your marketing budget. People do things for other people. Okay. There's a social currency here. So if you ask someone randomly or if you send out an email, hey, could you help us out with a review? No, they don't want to help you, your law firm out. But if the case manager has been spending hours with them on the phone or helping them get through their case, says, can you do me a quick favor? Now they're super motivated or a lot more motivated, and your chance of success goes up significantly. So that's one critical secret is having the right person ask. Another thing to know that's helpful is, and a lot of PI firms are guilty of this, people love to wait until the end of the case. That's a total waste of time. If you're doing that, stop that.
So, what techniques and systems can you recommend? Like, what the cadence needs to look like? Okay, so the numbers you threw around were pretty actually high because you're used to that caseload. But let's say the firm brings on 10 cases, so realistically they should get 5 to 7 reviews. So, what that cadence needs to look like?
Yeah, when they should ask is the next thing. So if you're a small firm and you're waiting till the end of the settlement, that's not necessary. You could start, going back into your cases and your clients. You should be asking within the first 30 to 60 days. The reason for that is that the timing of that is you're trying to get the peak of their satisfaction. Now, in these types of cases, it's a little tricky. You would think and assume that it's always at the settlement when they're getting their check. Sometimes these cases are 2 or 3 years long and they're kind of jaded and worn out, and it's a long process. And their expectation was it was going to be a lot faster. And they're just as satisfied or more in the beginning when they feel like you're helping them out and they're talking to their case manager and they feel like it's going in the right direction. So if you're taking a note, within the first 30 to 60 days, your case manager should be having a conversation and ending it after they talk about the case. They initiate and engineer the feedback. Hey, am I taking good care of you? Have I answered all your questions? It's very simple. You don't need to overthink it. They're going to say, oh, yeah, you've been great, Samantha. I want to touch on what I would say is the number one reason why personal injury law firms don't get as many reviews as they would like to get, even though they're asking. Okay. Because that's a lot of them. A lot of people are listening to this guy. Chris, I'm already asking for reviews. Chris, I already get a decent amount. You got to get more and squeeze out everything you can. The number one reason that even when you ask, people aren't giving the reviews is this is the moving parade of life. Okay. Even when people say, yes, I'll give you a review, it's not that they're lying to you. It's that they get busy, they get off the phone, they check an email, they go pick up their son, and they've forgotten about you. Okay. So it's nothing personal, but if you want to be more successful with your system and your scripting and how you're asking people, the ingredient you're missing is you need to get a verbal commitment on when they're going to give you the review. So I'll give you an example of what that sounds like. Oh, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you saying you're going to give a review. That really means a lot. Do you think there's any way possible you could do that when we get off the phone? Right. And I just wait for the response. And then you'll say, oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. Or, Chris, do you think that there's any way possible you can do that by the end of the day, right? So the point is, you're trying to get them to commit as to when they're actually going to do it. And then they create a mental space in their brain of like, oh yeah, I said I'm going to do it, after I get off the phone, and that's when they do it. That dramatically increases the likelihood that they're actually going to do it.
Do you also send like a link to the review?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You want to make it as easy as possible and remove any friction. So texting them, I don't recommend email ideally. And just know, I know there's also, because I've talked to a lot of people about this, there's some people listening to this, Chris, that are saying, yeah, but I really don't know how do I know if they're really happy? And I don't want them to leave a negative review. People are worried about the wrong things. The main thing you need to be worrying about is you're not getting enough reviews. That's number one. You need to be asking everyone. You're going to know if someone's irate. And if you engineer the feedback, like, hey, are we taking good care of you? You're going to get the feedback. If they're really upset, you don't move forward. But 95% of people, they're going to do it.
I'm going to test it now in our own agency. I like this because, case managers in our case would be customer success managers. They have close relationship, and we have a lot of very happy customers, but everyone's busy. They don't just go left and right leaving reviews. No one's not a local Google guide or something. It's
all these little nuances make a difference. But once you can establish a new habit, think about how many years you're going to be asking for reviews. I mean, you try to refine the system and your scripting and your messaging. And once you get it down, again, it's the gift that keeps on giving. My heart goes out to, I love marketing, and I always respect the marketing dollar. So respecting the marketing dollar means you try to get everything you can out of what you've already put in, for the same advertising cost. You could be getting more people going to your website. You could get more people calling you, more people converting on an intake call. You could convert more people when you're chasing them to get back in touch with you. You could get more people giving you a review. You could get more of your clients giving you referrals. These are all leverage points that you want to maximize when you're a small firm trying to scale, because you may not have, the leverage with dollars. If you're listening to this and you can spend $10 million a year, you could throw money at things and make it work. But for everybody else,
and it's such a good tip as well, because you're just using your existing resources, your existing client that you already paid for, and assumingly that things are going well. If things are not going well, then you have an even bigger issue to worry about. Well, Chad, this has been a great conversation. We're to our end time. Where can people find the Chat GPT if they want to chat with you, or have you helped them with some of their either intake or review generation processes?
The easiest would just be to send me an email, chad@chadgpt.law, and we could connect. And I mostly work off of referral, but they can find my email there and see how we can help.
Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation. I am confident we'll have you back on to talk about more deeper layered challenges. This was more a surface level conversation, but it was really great. I think a lot of knowledge nuggets, and I'll have to test some of these myself for our own agency. So, all right. Thanks, Chad.